My name is Kenn Clausen. I'm head of digital practice at 3XN, and this is my NORDFY talk.
Welcome to our first episode of NORDFY Talks. We are here with Kenn Clausen. He's the head of digital practice at 3XN. Hi Ken.
Hello.
Nice having you here today.
Thanks. Nice space.
Yes, pretty nice here. You want to talk a little bit about yourself before we dive into the questions, just to understand a little bit who's Kenn, where you're coming from, and where do you work?
Yeah, I've been living in Copenhagen for the past, living and working in Copenhagen for the past 10 years, working at 3XN Architects, GXN Innovation. Before that, I was 2 years on and off working at a company in Amsterdam, living a little bit in Rotterdam as well. And before that, I finished school, started in a school in the northern part of Jutland. I was thinking a little bit, I tried to look a little bit back on what that school gave me and how it has shaped me to who I am today. So the school is Aalborg University. It's a technical school that also has architecture included, art and architecture included in the program, of course. So it is architecture, but with a lot of technical flair. For the majority of the semesters, you are almost 75% of the time working in groups, and the big groups, like 5-6 groups. 5-6 person groups. But when I look back now, I think that shaped me a lot, not from a digital point of view here, but from a social aspect of things. It was literally learning how you work in a team. It was setting up the full project. It was pinning up the days where you met with teachers. When do you move your project along? How do you ensure that your models also is updated to the next phase? When do you submit for renders? When do you submit for printing? So all of these social aspects of embracing the individual in the group while also maintaining kind of a core focus on how you progress your project was something that I can see now I learned, but back then didn't know if I learned. And the second thing I want to maybe touch on was the more technical part of things that really is heavy influential in how I work today. That because we were paired with these architect, engineer, art professors, you had so many different inputs, but it also meant that you had so many different stakeholders already from the beginning. So a tool in the beginning had to actually comply with many different answers. And I see that as an advantage today that I didn't know back then that I learned. So that was quite an experience. But luckily one of the teachers took me aside and offered me kind of a part-time job at his little practice, working with the pavilions and just experimenting with light installations, pavilions for space, for cultural projects. And this is where I really understood that tools are theoretical, but practice is also heavily based on analog. And one funny thing that I've always taken with me all the way to all of the projects I've been fortunate enough to work on is a pavilion we did that was nicely detailed. As everyone knows, everything was captured, all length, everything was perfect. It was a steel frame structure, wireframe. We cut everything perfectly in the length, but we had to weld everything together ourselves. So we had to learn how to weld. And it started nicely and clean as everyone know it, but when you reach the end, the tolerances were so far apart from the real life, so we had to cut off and adapt to that. And this was nice to embrace these flaws, but it really taught me something about the importance of having these close connections with actually all stakeholders in the project as you go forward. So if you spin forward to today, I am working at 3XN Architects, as mentioned before, and here I sit in a role that kind of does the same. It is trying to frame a lot of the stakeholders internally at 3XN. We have a lot of different ones, but also externally, how do we communicate with external partners when it comes to sharing models, sharing data, but also just interfacing and communicating our sometimes maybe complex to simple stories and models, and sometimes the reverse, how do we communicate our BIM and information models.
Yeah, you're touching on a lot of the topics that we want to discuss here today.
Yeah.
There's communication, there's interdisciplinary work. Also, there's something about the practitioner. But maybe for those unfamiliar, if there's anyone still unfamiliar with who's 3XN.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what kind of work does 3XN practices? Where do you have studios? And also there's a very peculiar setup at 3XN that maybe you want to elaborate with in-house research and innovation department.
Yeah.
So maybe...
the elevator speech would say that it was established back in 86. Actually, the year I was born, 3XN came to the world. And 3XN is an architectural practice that has built buildings around the world. We are a team now of 200 interesting backgrounds, I would say, diverse backgrounds, diverse areas of fields. And we really try to cover a lot of ground around the world with, in my mind, a small team if you compare to the scale of projects we do. And it ranges from healthcare to office to culture. Like, we don't really have a set type. I will say we have a set method on how we approach our designs, always investigating, challenging the process, I would say. Also with, as mentioned before, the established GXN research department, the whole impact of sustainability is core in how we both run our methods and processes digitally, but of course also from a strategic point of view. So we are now, as I said, 200 people spread around 5 offices. So Copenhagen is the key place. We have a little office in Stockholm, and we have quite a lot of projects in Sweden. We have a bigger office now, almost 25 people in Australia, because of 2 key projects that we won over there in the past years, and that has kind of framed who we are there. We are a little office in New York now, and then we have London, last office that joined, because we have also projects there now. So this is kind of the scale we do have.
And you said that you also work a little bit with the GXN, or exclusively at
maybe I should elaborate a little bit on that setup here. So GXN is our research unit. 7-8 years I was working at GXN, and the past 2 years after my role changed a little bit, I moved over to the 3XN side and became a little bit more of an umbrella of the digital approach in-house. So being able to tap into the work from GXN, from our interior or visuals department, but also linking into our local offices around the world. So GXN, both knowing it from inside out and from outside in basically, is focusing on new materials, new technologies, especially within green tech, and also behavior and human-centric design. And how we work together is quite interesting to see that when I started almost 10 years ago, not there yet, but soon, I was fortunate enough to run our digital, let's say, direction back then, and be project leading our robotic fabrication projects. But I was the first GXNer who was placed directly in a 3XN workflow in a team. And immediately I could see that the skills that us as computational designers had and have was creating so much value from the beginning. I got so much information from how the team works, and of course also saw a big impact in how I do things. But what I see now, fast forwarding 10 years till today, I think when you see our deliveries, it's very difficult to actually see who does what. It's not a consultancy anymore internally. It's really a fluent workflow, because there's so many requirements in our deliveries and how we want to achieve our buildings that needs that kind of knowledge and extra additional knowledge in our process. And I think to sum that up here, I think the most interesting part, being part of that journey, is that people talk a lot about research and bring research into practice. One thing that I have always enjoyed as well is that how do you bring practice into research again? And I think that has changed also GXN's scalability over the years. And they of course work internally with us, but also have external consultancy roles for other companies, and also work with other research projects with a lot of different stakeholders, and a lot of, actually in my mind, interesting other partners to partner up with the projects. So a little bit of a big range, I would say.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you've touched a little bit on the benefits of this internal setup. Do you think that from a business standpoint, so we have let's say a financial and a cultural perspective. So if we touch a little bit on from a financial standpoint, do you think this investment that back in the day Kim Hertford and the leadership team put into developing GXN has benefit 3XN to acquire capabilities, to achieve better design, but also to reach to more interesting projects, and at the same time this investment also paid off by being like a magnet to attract for talent? Do you see people applying?
100%. a lot of topics there to cover. I think one thing that maybe sometimes people forget is that since GXN was established back in 2007, what is that, 15, 16 years ago, there's been a lot of trial and errors on the way that has made us to who we are today, which means that of course there's been earlier days when things was maybe not looking good from a financial perspective, and we didn't foresee where it was going to go today. But I think the reason why it was established was also the need for being able to step a little bit outside of the project wheel. You can sometimes end up being stuck in that wheel for a long time and forgetting to reflect honestly on your own work, but also on the architectural field as a whole. What company am I part of? I will say that it 100% attracts a different type of talent, me including back in the days that was maybe at that point a little bit of a misfit to 3XN, but over time maybe became a great fit to 3XN. And in that kind of, I always tend to say that if you have a question, I enjoy that it can be answered from many different backgrounds. And I think that's what GXN offers. We have sustainability engineers, we have environmental psychologists, anthropologists, people, as I mentioned, specialists in green tech. There's so many different backgrounds that offers quite a new eye and view to some of the questions and challenges we face. So to sum it up, yes, I think it 100% has a benefit to how we design, but over time it has also taken us a little bit of maturing in terms of when do we involve GXN, how do we blend it one-to-one together, when is it, like there's still always learnings and trial and errors, but yeah.
I mean, you mentioned quite a few interesting things that maybe you mentioned before, the digital practice and the analog world. So maybe shifting the conversation slightly over there for the way we see it, there's a big transformation, one could call, from the times pre-COVID to the times post-COVID. If we were already working in a digital setup, it has accelerated the way we can collaborate remotely. Pretty much all our workflows are cloud-based. So there's a lot of digital tools and digital environments that we operate in. But at the same time, there's the analog part of the job. There's still lots of in-person meetings with clients. There's physical models that we can use to communicate our ideas. There's site visits with all their challenges. And you mentioned this working digital in the analog world. Is there something you want to elaborate over there, how you see it from your...
I think if we take it step by step, I would like to take it from the individual point of view first and the employee point of view first. I think we are in a fantastic, optimistic world where there's a lot of opportunities. And that is both a plus and a minus. So step a little bit out of the fantastic thing that the world offers digitally. It can be a little bit of a dangerous path to go on, because I would like all offices to have kind of a policy on how you deal with this kind of being online all the time. Because if it's that easy to log on at home or log on to your workstation at work if you need more power, people have a tendency to do that more often than not. So even though we force people to log off at work, it seems like immediately after they log on to something else. So we are part of this kind of online, offline discussion all the time. And I could be a little bit nervous that it will blend it a little bit too much. I sometimes enjoy to completely log off and then jump on to actually enjoying time with my family. But I've actually realized something, and that brings me a little bit back to my introduction of the Aalborg University and working in groups. Somebody likes to sleep a little bit longer than others, and somebody are a little bit more stronger in certain time during the day than others. So we at 3XN are trying to protect that process. It is important that you are available at certain times so that there is an option to have the physical meetings. But we also know that all of our meetings has to be planned into some of the, in Teams or in Skype or whatever you use, because we need everyone to be available and also others to log on. So when you ask me about where do I see all of this is going, and is it positive, negative? I think everything is positive, and I think also that the employees, if they want to be part of the conversation in future, that is something they will need to accept, being part of this digital communication wheel, so to say. And I think that's a strength, but you need to be a little bit careful that we have a little bit of control of logging on and off. I enjoy that there's a flexibility to being able to work at office and also remote. But it's important for all employees that are going to companies in the future that they are able to work remote and be part of the conversation still. So that means that you cannot stay outside of that communication wheel. That digital communication wheel is here to stay, and I think it has stayed there for a long time. I've been there for a long time. We just didn't really pay attention to it. I have a little of a fun thing here. When I started the office 10 years ago, I asked day one, is it possible for me to also work from home some days? Because I need my brain to not being disturbed if I have to do these, back then, complex things for our projects. And then I had an interface back and forth, and we just called over Skype or over the phone. That was enough, and then by mail. But it seems like that's not enough anymore. You need to be part of that wheel. So when COVID happened, let's call it as it is, I read this funny post saying that who was responsibility for changing your digital communication in-house? What is your leadership? Was it IT or was it COVID? And funny enough, I think many actually answers number 3 here, that is what forced it in the end. But I think for the positive in my mind, in terms of my work and life balance, it has changed, but I enjoy to have a couple of times during the day where I have to step out of that wheel a little bit as a GXN, again, step out of the wheel, look at it a little bit from more, I would say, outside in than being part of the machine room. And that allows me to maybe work during the day, have a little bit of booting down and then booting up again at night. And I know from other industries and other family members that they have had struggles at their companies actually being able to work remotely. Yeah. And they are not that happy about it. So I think it's something that is to come. One thing I want to touch on, you mentioned also the whole thing about, are you getting a little bit detached from the physical and analog world? I think you are. I think you are a little bit detached from that. But I think, and what I see out there that I enjoy a lot, is sometimes the push is coming from start, and sometimes actually the pushing is coming from the end down. And if you look at the building sites today, we see a couple of them already changing to a more digitally minded building site, that the new educated craftsmen that are coming to site, they have a fantastic toolbox to build, but they have a little extra thing down there. They have a smartphone, they have a tablet, they also soon will know about VR, MR glasses. So the whole relationship between the digital world and maintaining that will become even more key to the building site, because a lot of these people will not sit with 2D pen and paper. No. Only they will have the model to compare back and forth. And we are seeing that becoming more and more a necessity in our projects. So it will be interesting to see when we fast forward if it's enough to be part of the digital world and stay a little bit away from the building side, or how does that kind of play happening?
I also want to talk about the AEC industry and the promised benefits of all this technology. But before that, just to touch a little bit on process and culture, because it seems that that's also where you were, where you're touching before. The digital, analog, the working remotely or not. How do you see? I mean, you said that you have 5 offices worldwide. From an office culture, is there a particular approach you guys at 3XN have to get the whole office together, get a sense of collaborative unity, if we can call it like that, but also like meetups, annual meetups, knowledge sharing? How do you try to unify this?
Yeah, how do you do that? Yeah, I think first I want to zoom a little bit out and say no one fits all. Like there's so many different ways to, I would say, solve this challenge, and it's something that needs to be maintained a lot. It's not coming with one good idea and then that was a fixed thing. It is about maintaining it. And funny enough, yesterday we had kind of a new approach to this that we call panel debates, where we talk about ambitions, curiosity, in general culture at 3XN and who we are, both internally and towards the industry. It was set up with a short keynote from one of the partners, setting the tone of yesterday's debate. Then we had 2 panel rounds with different employees that matched that. So one was more about like the office culture. Exactly, we had our CEO sitting, how does she actually maintain this overview? Then we had our partner in Sydney also sitting in, giving some insights on how it is to be local and global and all of these things and what are required in this transformation. And I think what spun out of that is that it requires a lot of work, and it also requires a mindset change in your own personality. That when we were only, and when I say only, Copenhagen and Stockholm, it was a little bit easier to understand those time zones because they didn't exist. But when you look at it from a office culture today, our CEO said something quite nice, that all of the employees needs to understand that if they want to share something, they need to think of us as a global company now. You share it with the New York office, you share it with Australia, London, and Stockholm, and of course Copenhagen. So how do we maintain that? I think we try. We haven't found maybe the best way. We have found one or many ways. We have knowledge sessions, as we call them. It's 1 hour session every Thursday online where everyone can log in. And it can be many topics. It can be, how do you do a proper competition at 3XN? How do you maintain a budget? How do you work with a computational designer? How do you work with BIM? So it's not only the technical, it's also in general how the office works. And they work, they are good, but I don't think that they are enough. There's so much more that needs to happen. We have introduced an exchange program internally at 3XN, where employees are moved to other locations if they want, and they can apply, and then they are there for 2 to 3 to 4 months. So Copenhagen-based goes to Australia, to US, and vice versa, because we need this personality and culture that has derived from the 3XN Denmark base. We need that to be spun out. And we're trying to introduce many other alternatives to this. I know when we are developing something in our group that are more tech-based, we need to be always ready to answer questions from the other teams as well. So I have ambassadors in these offices that are really computationally heavy, so that we don't need to talk to the whole office. We talk to that person, and then that person is responsible for it at these offices. So there's these different relationships happening in between offices. But it takes time. I think one thing that the partner in Sydney mentioned is that in the beginning, when you are a small office, you use the power from the main office. But over time, you need to have those skills locally at your location. And this takes time, scaling up, getting projects in, but it is a tough work, and it's really a lot of flying back and forth as well.
And the project is in relation to the organization of the project, because you say you have local ambassadors. You try to replicate the competences in the different offices, or it's more project-based offices, and let's say the conceptual brain power is still in Copenhagen, or how do these offices, how much of a replica of the main office they are, or how independent on creativity, on design exploration?
I think it's a hybrid of everything you just said there, but I would also say it depends on the scale of your local office. So as mentioned in Sydney, they are quite big now. They are 25 people, so they are taking more and more and more of the jobs they can handle themselves. Still with a mindset of how it's done at 3XN. While some of the other offices that are close by, like Stockholm and London, they of course have a clear contact to the market, but because it's close by and time zones are okay, then there's a closer relationship to the Copenhagen office, and we see teams sitting based in Copenhagen that are working on projects in Sweden or in the UK, while it's rare now to see people working on projects in Sydney from the Copenhagen office. Sometimes we help out if that's the case. And then I still have a project that has been running for years, so I'm still very much in it, I would say, with the Sydney office.
Maybe to pick up on what you said in regards to the AC industry, one of the frequent criticisms is that it's an industry that's very slow to adapt to new age disruptive technology. There's lots of promised benefits that can be harvested by embracing the technology. And you mentioned something about a telephone, a smartphone on your pocket these days. We just saw, you also talked about robotics when you joined at 3XN. We just saw Apple coming out with a Vision Pro goggle. So there seems to be a very fast development, maybe finally one could say, of drone technology, with scanning technology, with robotics, immersive realities. How much is 3XN paying attention to this, or what is your perspective personally into the AEC pace to incorporate this? Because in a way you could say you have all this technology that most designers are willing to apply on the early stages. Sometimes you still do 2D paperwork to document something that you're going to build then afterwards. So maybe touch a little bit upon the process, but also current process, but also maybe the future as you see it on the AEC industry.
If I look at it from a 3XN point of view, we have been lucky, fortunate enough to be part of projects over the year that has kind of enabled us and forced us to push the boundaries for what is available, what is possible, and begin to understand. It could be new fabrication methods, it could be new workflows, etc., that was needed to solve a certain building. But I also believe and think that one of the most important things that I see today, that maybe I think honestly I missed years ago, is that you need, as a company, we are doing it now properly at 3XN, framing a digital task force. And that task force needs to be super flexible and agile in how they scan and map the market. And each company will 100% have their own ideas on what is right and wrong for them. And this is where it becomes quite important to know and understand what are the process, what are the services, and what are the skills that you offer to the market and to the clients. And from there on, you have a good argumentation for validating what you need and don't need. So if you go into some tech businesses, scanning of buildings, I think we will see us as a company taking more and more this in early phase, because we are getting more and more requirements and asked to do transformation buildings, where there's already an existing mapping that needs to happen. I don't know if the client will do that or if we will actually enjoy doing that, because that helps us maybe to find those nitty-gritty nice parts in a project. So sometimes it also is very project dependent on where you are in the industry. I think if we move out and then look at it from my personal view to the industry and be a little bit more bold to say, that's why I wanted to mention before that it's a generation movement as well. You can 100% see on building sites who has the smartphone and want to use it, and who has the smartphone and are using it for different things. So we are seeing more and more power in those small pocket machines that allows us to interface with the AEC industry in a completely another cloud-based environment, which means that somebody can be on the building site scanning that. You also have seen these Boston Dynamic robots walking around, right? That will scan these buildings, and maybe hopefully soon that information will find its way also back to the architects. Because we are doing the projects we do, we tend to have quite a lot to say geometry wise in our process, which means that sometimes those data actually finds its way back to our model, and we have to test if they are within or without in or outside of tolerances. So there's some of these technologies that are finding its way back to, I will not say early phase, maybe some of them, but I will say in the process itself. So we are slow adopters, but I think it goes faster and faster, because the ones who in the end will build it, that's where we have the analog part, and that is slowly finding its way down to the early stream. And the discussion we had yesterday that I actually found quite interesting is we are all faced with the same problem now, that the material bank of the world are changing rapidly, and the accessibility of getting new materials or getting reused materials are changing rapidly. And that puts a demand on that you will need to talk about materiality, details, how to build earlier in your project. And maybe that will create a completely new demand of getting AEC technologies up to speed where we want them to. So there's a little bit of still a waiting game, and I can't really understand why it's always a waiting game here. I thought when I entered 3XN 10 years ago that everyone would just sit in Grasshopper, do all of the things in Grasshopper. But what I've learned now is that it's not about the software, it's about the method behind. And if you have the method, you can easily jump to one or to the other. You don't need to always be able to build the car. You can always, it's also okay to just have the driver license to kind of drive the car. And I see that a little bit with these,
Interesting. So you actually give me a good way into my next question, which is talk about geometry, technology, and so on. Also the fact that GXN started some 15 years ago. It's more or less at the same time that we started to use the term computational designer, parametric architecture, and so on. Or at least here in Europe, it became quite popular. And I would say slowly but surely, this parametric designer, this computational designer, that was mastering this new language, Grasshopper, and started to take more and more of an anchor position in a team. I would say today this is an expertise that all big, large studios have, this type of professional, and they seek these designers because of the ability to manipulate the geometry. So, in your opinion, as a computational designer, you made a joke to me the other day about there's still design in the title. There's this thin line between the technician or the technical expert of someone that is working in a Rhino or in a Revit environment, deeply into Dynamo or Grasshopper or whatever, and at the same time having this immense power of shaping geometries and creating new articulations between elements and pieces. So in your opinion, are the computational designers the drivers of the design intent, or are we still using a very traditional approach to the pen and the brain and sit down with an idea and then you just represent it digitally? How do you...
That is a lot of topics to cover, but I think one thing to maybe remember from a good starting point, because I completely agree with what you're saying, which is what I was saying, that computational designer, if that's what your title refers to, remember that you're also a designer. I see a lot of times where somebody forgets that, and then you are outside of the workflow. And in my opinion, architecture, or whatever you do today, and hopefully also yesterday and in the future, is based on teamwork, and you are part of the team. That means that you're not responsible for the project. The whole team is responsible for the project, and you are one of the key members in driving certain parts of this. I think that there is a little bit of a change happening at the moment in some offices, not in ours yet, because we still are very focused on our process and being able to design with those tools. But I see in other offices and in the industry as a whole that you see more computational power coming in that are almost leaning towards computer scientists. And maybe that's good, maybe that's less good, depends on the company. But in our company, it's important that you always stay true to the process of what 3XN is. And that is also to be part of the process. If I kind of translate everything you said into how I have been working there, the first many years I was a computational designer. We defined as parametric design. I don't know why, maybe it was easier to understand. You work with parameters in your process. But until it changed to the title now, so have seen a lot of the techniques being used on many occasions in the process. But my brain cannot do what a render specialist or a plan specialist can do. I can support and assist. I have other skills that I need to fulfill. It's often back to control over your geometry, control over your responsibility, which often finds its way back to facade massing design. That's where I've been sitting, where I see many of the computational designers sit. But there's a shift now, because there's going to be more and more requirements coming from external stakeholders, and also internally with all of the simulation packages, all of the know-how of what is in your building from an LCA point of view. There's so many requirements, just also from a finance point of view, you need to know early on. So I can see that this method behind the computational designer would scale up now and become more important. But as a person, I think you also will see many more employees taking up that power here. I think maybe the phrase computational designer also need to be maybe rephrased a little bit, because there's so many different skills that one has that maybe another computational designer doesn't have. But what I've seen both in portfolios and people coming in, both young and a little bit more experienced people, is that you can quickly see if they know, if they understand if they are a computational designer or if they are a problem solver. A design solver or a problem solver. And the computational designers that I've found the most appealing and has the strength is the one who knows exactly when to flip from one to the other. And I often say that a computational designer's main responsibility is also to have a know-how of the full spectrum of what is possible, or at least explore it, which means that they should know when they are and are not a slave for the tool. Because that's what I see, that people who don't have these skills sometimes end up being a slave for the tool and only does what the tool offers. While us that are maybe trained a little bit differently and ask different questions have an opportunity here to really push those boundaries. But the funny thing is that I have also seen quite a lot of talent coming in that are becoming a slave for their own tool, because they sit and spend so much time in the spaghetti and the grasshopper network that they are maybe forgetting that when the final result comes out, it doesn't equal good design just because you spend a lot of time setting up the system. You're still validated on how you interface with the process as you go along. So there's missed opportunities, but there's huge opportunities, because having sadly been in the life before and after visual programming, grasshopper in my case, before we were sitting and scripting, and you had to wait until the script was done, and then you could see an output, and it rarely worked. You had to go back and forth until there was something there, and the rest of the team was waiting. But with visual programming, you have an opportunity here to show your process. You can always show, how does it look now? How does it look now? And that makes you maybe engage even more with the process. I think that's where the strength lies in being a computation designer, that you can actually engage more with the process than you could before, because of all of these new platforms, tools that are offered here. And also, I think that after a little bit of a breakthrough of computation design in many offices, I think people, they also understand that if you have parameters that you can change, something is affected. If you put something in a chain together and you affect something, it affects the other. And as mentioned before, not everyone needs to know how to build those systems, but I can see a lot of people that maybe don't know how to build the systems are aware of how the method works. That's why I keep bringing it back to that if you have your method on how you work towards the process you're in, if that works for you, you can easily deploy that and move to other software packages, to other phases in the project. I think that's where sometimes, sadly, there's some missed opportunities in the business where people tend to forget that it's not a good sign that you know all plugins on Food for Rhino, but it's a very good sign if we can see the value and impact you did on a certain project.
Okay, Ken, maybe shifting a little bit towards innovation, and maybe innovation in the wake of artificial intelligence, and perhaps as we see it here at NORDFY, there's a pivotal time, I would risk saying, in history, certainly also in the creative art, that has never been, let's say, intellectually threatened. So technology has always been part of the creative arts, and creative designers, architects, alchemists all have had an evolution of their art alongside what the technology was allowing them to do, to express their ideas. But now there seems to be a democratization of a lot of the creative skills. People have access to a lot of tools that can express. So maybe to talk a little bit about innovation, how do you see, what is innovation in architecture these days? And what is the role of AI as you see it?
To answer that question, sometimes you need context to answer that question. And in my mind, I agree with you, AI is 100% a game changer in the industry, for the good, and maybe if you get on the train for the bad here. I think that AI, if you are smart in working and understanding your process, can create big opportunities for you. At 3XN, I think we've always tried to push the limits on innovation, both because 3XN is an hour they are, but also because we have our innovation unit that are touching base with a lot of new biomaterial research, construction for design for assembly and disassembly, for understanding also the human-centric behavior in spaces. We have so many smart tech devices in our buildings today, and they are only becoming more and more tomorrow. So I will say that some of these innovative thinkings are beginning to cross borders with other interesting collaboration opportunities for architectural companies. Maybe tomorrow we are not innovating only within our buildings and delivering the shell and the spaces. Maybe you're actually sitting and talking with product developers, AI components that helps you to feel even better, make the space even smarter and even more intelligent in terms of when you turn lights on and off, and understand what meeting rooms are available. There's so many intelligent products out there that are already doing that. But in terms of, if you ask me, what is the innovation today? I think we are at a peak where the next step will show what the next type of innovation is. I think we have been innovating quite a lot over the years, but at the moment we have a big pressure all around the world that forces us to innovate. We need to think our supply chains in the building industry. That would 100% change the way we design, because suddenly you cannot design and just take a new material in from Inkscape and bam, you have a beautiful render. Now you are responsible to understand that does this material actually exist in the world? What carbon footprint does it hold? So in that kind of sustainable innovation, there's so much happening that will find its way into the industry and is already finding its way. And I think it will create a completely, maybe not new aesthetic, but it will 100% create a new mindset of how you approach innovation in the projects. And maybe, as we, I think, touched on earlier, I think many of these tools that we talk about here at the moment today and how a computational designer work, I think that will not change tomorrow. I think that they will be quite fast in adopting new technologies and be the ones who bring in new tests, new ideas, new workflows. And of course, we are a company that has one way of doing it and other companies have other ways of doing it. But in terms of innovation, I think we are at a good spot, that we have the opportunity inside the office to give employees an opportunity to sometimes step outside of the project wheel and go in and research in certain areas. I 100% use that a lot when I have employees working with me on projects, that they are able to step outside of the project and be able to scan what did they actually just do, and are there other alternative ways of doing that. And that helps the employees to educate kind of themselves a little bit in the process and scan the market for possible optimization possibilities. But it also helps the company and me as a whole to always challenge the default and provoke the default in the office. Yeah.
You touched upon education. Yeah. It would be interesting to hear a little bit about how do you see, maybe not so much education per se, but training of staff, upskilling, how is 3XN and you particularly looking into the future upskilling of your colleagues and the company at large?
Yeah. I think all companies should sit down now and figure out if it's an internal or external lecture program you will need to develop for your employees. Because I think that we will need to nurture and maintain almost an education wheel at 3XN. We are trying slowly to build up an education wheel where you know that these months per year you are trained in this program and this method, and this time at this and this and this. This gives us a chance to always kind of update the material course as it goes forward, but it also gives us a chance to listen to the feedback we get from the employees. But we are feeling a lot of anxiety and people really wanting to learn now. Especially it's funny to see that a lot of the young talents, they really want to learn how it is to work in Revit. But you have people who sits and have been sitting in Revit for many years. They want to learn Rhino now. And that's a little bit fantastic because that gives us a completely new spectrum and an approach. You're opening up your toolbox. I think that's maybe the key here. The more agile you're becoming as an employee, the stronger you are in placing yourself in different positions over time. And what we see and what we are testing at the moment is when we look at all of these new possibilities with the low-hanging fruits, Midjourney and all of those AI visual picture-based components now, we try to identify what are our departments. We have visuals, we have internal render company, we have a model workshop, we have GXN as mentioned many times, we have competition architects, detail architects, business development. We have so many different parts of this chain here, and they all face tools in a different way. So how we are trying to do it now is to flip it around and then look at these different departments and then see maybe interiors should be the one who's driving the Midjourney journey at the moment to test if that creates completely new, interesting and spatial feelings in the spaces we create. While maybe on the more delivery part, we're looking more into tools that helps us to work smarter and more optimized. And I think in that kind of world, we can't really predict where things are going, what you need to learn or not learn. But I think it will be more fast-paced, and you will need to jump a little bit more agile from tool to tool, from phase to phase, and 100% also from mindset to mindset as an employee. More agile tomorrow.
So if we don't look at the employee, but we look at the future employee, those are still in school. Yeah. I mean, well, they can also be in the market, but let's perhaps focus on the future professionals. How do you see this transformation, this technology impacting the education or the future of the profession, so that the focus, perhaps you're talking from jumping from mindset to mindset, some words on education and on students, what should they be focusing on?
I'm actually a little bit curious at the moment to see if what you learn on first semester, if we talk tools and mindset, are useful 5 years when they graduate. I honestly don't know in the speed that everything is moving towards at the moment. But there's no doubt that some of the key factors, if we take some of the new technologies out of the wheel and just look at the education per se, you need to adopt very early on your understanding of what sustainability is and how you approach that. This could be from strategies that you implement in all of your projects. It could also be from using different digital tools to apply sustainable techniques on your project. But there's 100% something that will continue in your education all years. If you then look at the circle around, that is more what approaches you, what techniques and technologies are happening. I think you should begin to pay even more attention to what happens in the industry, because we are coming even more closer to a faster wheel. Before, I felt that even though you were sitting and working at a software and you came into the office, they were basically working in the same and you were sometimes working faster. But I think it has flipped a lot now. I think a lot of the companies as us and other really interesting companies around, they work really fast and they adopt really fast new techniques and skills, plugins, tests. We also see that many new developers, new platforms and software companies are approaching us. That was not the case 10 years ago. Now they are approaching us with their ideas, their new technologies and platforms. And instead of us coming in the end, when it's released, they actually come to us in alpha and beta mode and wants to know if we're interested in working together with them. So the speed and the profession, and the practice are going so fast now, it's a little bit difficult to predict from a student point of view what tools and what methods to use. But I'm a core believer that agility is the same in both places. And then don't dare to ask us, send mails to us if you want to learn something. I've had fantastic students asking, how did you did this? How did you make this roof? We can't find anything. And we are happy to have a talk with you for 1 hour and you can learn how it works in practice. What do we use? Can you maybe come with interesting inputs for us? So ask practice is also a key thing that sometimes I think students forget. We like to talk. We like to show our work and inspire the next generation.
So one last question before we say goodbye for this time. Crystal ball question. So in your best guess, where is the profession going? You just said that you don't really know when the students get out of the school if what they learn is what's going to be useful, but we can only guess at this stage. So if you could pitch a little bit, where is the architectural profession, the future of the practice, the future of the design studio, as you wish? Look at the crystal ball, give us a thought.
The profession needs to refine themselves a little bit now, because there's so many changes happening in the environment, and this not only from a sustainable point of view, but also a human point of view. Like, people need houses, they need places to live, they need places to protect themselves and their family. So there's a need for us to be part of that change and inspire to new ways of approaching this. So I see kind of two things maybe happening. I see that either you are too small for the big projects and you are too big for the small projects, and then you will become something in the middle that maybe don't know where you belong. And that is a little bit dangerous, and I think that's why we see a lot of companies buying up companies, and they are becoming almost huge companies that has everything in-house. And I sadly see that we will see more and more of this. But I think there's also another side of this that I've been very, very positive, and that is that because the world is changing, maybe it's an opportunity for companies like 3XN and others to engage in really interesting collaborations with other companies, really finding a key group of material experts, software developers, that you are part of a little bit of a community. So you're not 3XN architects per se, you have a big circle of close and trusted companies that you work together with. And together you go out in the world still with different mindsets, but having exactly the same kind of purpose. And I think that we will see more and more of these crossovers as we go forward. There's always new technology happening. It's just important that you frame it so that the technology is an assistant to you, but you still are the driver, which means that at the moment there's a lot of people that are afraid of their jobs getting lost. But I see a future actually where if you do it correct, you have an opportunity to do the fun stuff, and then you have technology to maybe sometimes do the boring stuff that at the moment you are maybe doing. And that could be an interesting thing in the future to see who finds the way or don't find the way. I see it with the positive thing. I hope that we really find a good balance between those two worlds.
Absolutely. And we talk about that all the time on the looking at the opportunity, because there will come lots of opportunities. Ken, it was a pleasure having you here.
Yeah.
Super inspiring talks.
Yeah.
And maybe another time, in 1 year time, maybe we need to catch up again.
Yeah. Then there's other answers.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. See you next time.